And it's Carolina Moore, your favorite sewing and quilting YouTuber here, and today we're going to make a quilt from start to finish. And I have a stack of layer cakes here. We're going to pick a layer cake from that stack and use my new book, the 10-inch square quilt block book, to make a quilt start to finish. That's right, we're going to choose it, piece it, quilt it, bind it, all in this video, start to finish. By the end, we will have a completely done quilt. So let's get started. All right, I have my book here. So the first is to pick out the quilt we want from the book. And I've actually already taken a peek. I mean, I wrote the book, so not just taking a peek, but I refreshed myself a little bit on the quilts. I really think that I want to do this one, the large half square triangle quilt, because I want to get this done quick and I'd like to get it all done today. And obviously I've already done this design, so I want to do a different, and I think I want to do the chevrons, but we're going to take a quick look at some of the other quilts in the book. This is smaller half square triangles, which is also cute, but it's going to take longer to put together, although there are some really fun design options there. This quilt was actually the first that I made for the book, so I'd love to come back and revisit this one and maybe do something like this. There's so many quilts in this book. Half rail fence is one of my favorite go-tos because every single layer cake that I look at will look good as a half rail fence. This is half quarter square triangles, which needs a little bit more of a specific quilt or a specific layer cake because of the colors that you want. You kind of want 3 colors in here, with half of them being light and then a quarter of 2 different colors to get this look to it. Square in a square is a great one. I still want to make this one at some point with a fabric that will look good in like a full piece, so something that has like a bigger motif in it would look great, kind of like similar to this that I did with the mermaids and the rainbows in this 9 patch that has some of them sewn up as 9 patches and some of them as the full pieces. Quarter square triangles, that's such a cute one, and there's some different design formats for that one. Quarter log cabin is another one that's just a go-to for me. It looks good in every single fabric. So we have some different layout options. This one is actually cornerstones, layout option number 2. And then, where is it? This one is layout option number 1. So you can see how different they look, not just with the fabrics, but with the way that they're laid out. So this is the framed quarters, which is layout option number 1, and then cornerstones layout option number 2 is here. But because they're all facing the same direction, you get some continuity in here, even though you can't, your eyes might not catch it. It gives the whole thing a look of cohesiveness. And then there's some specialty designs in here that we're not going to do today. These definitely need some special layer cakes. This one's done with 1 layer cake. The heart was actually done with 2 that I combined, so I can get some light and some dark in here. But so we're not going to do a specialty one today, although I love those ones. Okay. And there's some instructions at the end for adjusting the size of your quilt if you want to add more blocks to your quilt, or if you want to add borders to make it bigger. There are different ways you can do that. We're just going to make the quilt as it is in the book, and I think we're going to do this zigzag option. This one's fun, but I think I'm going to do the zigzags. All right, so I have these layer cakes, and in order to do this quilt, I need a strong mix of light and dark so that it'll really show up here on the quilt. And obviously, the Ink Perfect in Carbon is a great option for having lots of dark and lots of light. This one would be great. It'd be a great mix. But I've already done this quilt in black and white, so I don't want to do it in black and white again. I want to show that this quilt can be done in other colors. This is Season of Tributes, Garden of Opulence. There's a lot of light in here and some dark. This one actually might make a really good half quarter square triangle when I'm looking at it. So not sure about this one. Bedtime Stories. There's a lot of light. Well, there's light, and then there's some light in here. So this one actually might have enough contrast between the 2 to make it work. So we'll set this one aside. Coyote Hill, I actually want to do a half rail fence on this one, I think. There's some really fun motifs in here as well that would be great for that square in a square that I want to make. think I'm going to save this for another one. There's not, I don't know that I'm going to get that dark and light. It's all fairly dark. I don't know that I'm going to get the contrast to really shine in this quilt. I mean, it's possible. I'd have to actually pull it apart and check. This one, there's a lot of light. I don't know that there's enough dark in here to make contrast. There could be. And this might be really fun as like a red and white almost looking quilt. This one is the softer side. This one's Open Heart or Maureen Cracknell. There's a lot of pink in here. I don't know that there's going to be enough contrast with that pink for this quilt. This, I mean, it would make, I would love to do, this would actually be a really cute quarter square triangle. Or this would be a really cute quarter log cabin. Really soft, beautiful looking quarter log cabin. I might save that one for a quarter log cabin. And then this one, the Flower Society. I love this line. I actually have some of this fabric on the bolt that, so I could add borders to this one if I wanted. Don't know that there's enough contrast. There might be. I'd have to pull it apart to see. But I think I'm going to save this one for a different quilt as well. All right, so that leaves this one. That hopefully will work. Otherwise, I can always go back and dig through my pile again and see what I have. So let's see. All right, I need half, so that's 21, 3, 6, 7. All right, these ones all look a little lighter, so I'm gonna pull those out. Wow, that's actually perfect. It splits exactly in half. Fabulous. So I've got my darks, I've got my lights, and this is gonna make a really fun, bright quilt. So I'm gonna take all my lights here. And I'm going to draw my diagonal lines on the back. So I'm going to use my cake cutter ruler, and on the back I'm just going to kind of center this. Now you can use whatever marking pen is your favorite. I'm using this one for the video because it's super juicy, so it will show up on the video for you to be able to see, but often when I'm doing them just for myself, I use a mechanical pencil. That's one of my favorite marking tools. But you can use whatever you want. Now you'll notice that your 10-inch squares aren't always exactly 10 inches. They might be a little bit bigger one direction. And those zigzag edges on the layer cakes make it a little hard to see where that 10 inches are. We're going to be squaring these blocks up, so don't worry too much about it. Just kind of line it up, center it the best you can. You just need to do this 21 times, drawing the line. There we go. All right, I've used my cake cutter ruler to draw all the lines on the back of my light colored fabrics, and now I need to pair these with my dark colored fabrics. Depending on the fabrics that you use, you might look at these fabrics a little bit and say, you know, if my lights aren't super light, I might want to pair them, the darkest lights with the lightest dark, and the vice versa. So in this case, I have this like peachy orange here, and I don't want to pair it with this peachy orange because I'm not going to get the contrast I want. So I want to make sure that this gets paired with these greens. However, or the blues, any of the blues, but just not with those peaches. However, if I go in the order that these are in and the orders that these are in, then all of my sets will be matching, and I don't think that's going to give me as a cool a variety look. So I want to shuffle these a bit. So I'm going to grab a green, a green, green, some blue, some blue. There's some yellow down there. It's not a perfect shuffle, and then when I sew them I just want to skip over the peachy ones when I sew to this floral. But I don't need to shuffle both sets. I just need to shuffle one set a little bit because of the number of the same fabrics that are in here. Now, it's not uncommon to have multiple of the same fabrics in a pack of 10-inch squares. It all depends on the size of the full lines. Now, most lines don't have 42 different fabrics in them, so most pre-cut packs that you get are going to have some duplicates, and that's really common. It doesn't hurt anything. We still get the full line, and we still get a lot of variety in our quilt, and we still know that it's all going to go together because it's still all the same line. Or in some cases they might be like curated packs, but they were curated to go together. So we're still going to be fine even though there's multiples of the same fabric in there. It's definitely not a concern. All right, we have these divided into two piles. We have our lights, we have our shuffled darks, and now it's time to start sewing. All right, I'm going to grab my light and grab my dark, put them right sides together, and just match up these edges best I can. They're pinked edges, so that means the little zigzag, and they might not match up exactly. That's okay. We're then going to bring it to the sewing machine, and we're going to sew 1/4 inch from either side. And if you want to do a little bit of a scant 1/4 inch, and scant means just a little smaller than, just shy of 1/4 inch, then you'll have a little more room to groove when you square these up later. I want to make sure that my point on this end and my point on that end, the two fabrics match up. And now I'm going to sew. And so to get my 1/4 inch seams a little scant, because I used a big fat pen, I'm lining up with the far side of the line. So generally you might line up with like the middle of the line, but I'm lining up with the far side of the line, and that'll give me a little bit of a scant 1/4 inch. So I'm going to sit here and sew on one side of the line, pairing up each of these. My next pair, I don't think that's going to be enough contrast because this is the darkest of my lights. So I'm going to grab the next one in my shuffled pile. If you want to pair them all up and have them already in a stack of pairs, you can do that. If you want to pair them up and give them a couple pins so they don't shift at all, you can do that as well. Up to you. We're going to sew all the way on all of these on one side of the line, and this time I'm using a little bit of a scant 1/4 inch. My third pair also not enough contrast, so I'm grabbing that next one in line and putting them together. Alright, we'll go ahead and sew all these, and I'll be right back when I have the lines sewn on one side of all of them. Alright, we're going to end with our needle up, and we have all of these sewn. Yay! Well, one side. We still have to do the other side, but the other side is actually going to be easier because we don't have to worry about pairing everything up. But we do need to take our little pennant flags here and separate them. I like to do that with a Blade Saver thread cutter, which is, it's like packaged up to be able to take to retreats and events with you. It has a little base, it has a little cutter, and you just put one of your old rotary blades in here, and now it's a thread cutter. So we can take our squares here, and right here on the cutter, we just cut. We want to set these line side up because it's just going to be easier for sewing, and if we put all our lines in the same direction and all of our sewn line on the same side, it's going to make it easier to just go and sew when we sew all these other sides. Right, I'm going to pull these all apart and then sew the other side just like we did the first, again with that scant bit of a 1/4 inch seam. Ending with the needle up. I don't know why I tucked this away, but I did. So now we can go ahead and cut all these apart again. And then we're going to cut them into our 2 half square triangles. I have a trick for that I can't wait to show you. Alright, we have all our pieces sewn. And now we're ready to cut them. And I'm going to line up that center line with a line on my mat. And then take another one, not shifting that one below, lining up the center line with the mat, lining up the stitching lines. And you can stack up probably 5 this way. I mean, you could try to do more, but this is going to save time. You could cut these all individually with scissors, but if you have a bigger rotary, if you have a bigger ruler, you can cut a bunch of these at once. So I've got 5 here, and I've got my ruler. I'll line this up, and with my rotary cutter, cut through 5 at a time. And that's a lot faster than cutting them one by one. So this is my preferred way to cut these triangles. And then while I'm cutting these triangles, I'm going to go ahead and turn my iron on and get that warming up, because our next step is going to be to press all these. Now each one of these triangles needs to get pressed, and we're just going to press towards the dark. We have all our pieces sewn together and pressed, and now we want to square them up before we get to sew our quilt top together. So we get to use our cake cutter ruler to square them up, and that's going to make it really easy. So we're going to put our piece down and then put the cake cutter ruler on top, and these have to be squared up to 9.5 inches. So we can see that 9.5 inch line here, and when we do our first squaring up, we just want to trim the absolute very edges of this, and we want to make sure that we have a little bit of edges sticking over that 9.5 inch line. Now, if your seams were not so scant and you can't square these up to 9.5 inches because you don't have a full 9.5 inches on here, no big deal. Just square all your blocks up to 9 inches instead. Your quilt's going to be a little bit smaller, but no one's ever going to know, and it will all be fine. So when we line these up, we have a couple different points to line up. We're lining up, now that we're doing the second cut, both the left side and the bottom. So there we go, the left side and the bottom. And then we also should be able to line up this diagonal line like that. And we cut and cut. And you can see I'm not cutting off a whole lot. There's not a lot that's being trimmed here. We'll do it one more time. Actually, we're going to do this 42 times in total. But we're going to line up that middle diagonal. Making sure that we have a little bit on all sides. So a little bit sticking out over that dashed 9.5 inch line. Square up, square up, turn it around, and we go again. And if you have a little bit of notching in your edges from the zigzag, that is totally fine. It's well less than 1/4 inch, so it's all going to be hidden away in the seam allowance, and no one's going to know. Now, if you're left-handed, this ruler will also work fine for lefties. We're just going to turn it 90 degrees. And we do the same thing. Making sure it sticks up at least a little bit over that dashed line, lining up the diagonal. And a left-handed person, which I am not, would top and the left side. And so lefty would be able to use this ruler as well, just by turning it 90 degrees. But I'm a righty, so we're going to cut these right-handed. All right, this is the third one of 42, so I have 39 more to go. I'll get these all trimmed up, and we're going to come back and talk about laying out and sewing up. All of the blocks are all squared up. Took a minute, and there is just a little bit of quilt confetti left over. Whew, that made a mess. So now we get to start sewing everything together. Now I do have a design wall behind me to lay these all out on, but it's not quite big enough for this quilt, and you might not have a design wall at home. So I want to show you how you can sew this quilt together without a design wall, as long as you're okay with being a little bit surprised with the way it gets laid out. If you want to be really specific in the way you lay these out, a design wall is great, or you can just use your floor. Honestly, I often use the floor to lay everything out. To me, it's really easy. But design wall is great if you have one, or we can go ahead and do the random method. So what we're going to do is we're going to sew everything into pairs. And so we have these pairs, and these pairs. And so that's pairs with, I guess, like a light colored arrow down. And then we have pairs with a dark colored arrow down, and then pairs with a light color, and then dark, and then light, and then dark, and then light. So there's 3 times 4 light, which is 7 pairs of light, and 3 times 3 pairs of dark, which is 9 pairs of dark. So let's go ahead and do 7 pairs of light, and these first 2 are the same. So I'm just going to set that one aside. This one has the same dark, so I'm just going to grab the third one. Oh, same light. Fourth one, there we go. Now I have 2 that are different on both. Now there might be some instances where I have the same next to each other. I'm going to try not. If I can avoid it, great. If I can't, well then I will just have some that have the same fabric right next to each other. It's not the end of the world. So I got my 1/4 inch foot in place. Checking my bobbin. There's not a lot of bobbin thread in there, so I'm going to have to change my bobbin during this process at some point. And so I want to keep an eye on that to make sure that I'm not sewing like 12 pairs together and then finding out, oh darn, I don't have any bobbin thread. So you can pin these if you like. I just lined up the edges, the top and the bottom. And sewing all the way down. I'm going to grab another pair. If this one works with one of the ones that I set aside, great. If not, I move on. Alright, so 12 lights, 9 darks. Alright, I have all my light down arrow pairs, and now I need my dark down arrow pairs, and I want to go ahead and pair them up one by one already, because I don't want to at the end get into 2 that don't match up. So if I do it now and pair them up into pairs, into sets, to try to get ones that don't have the same fabrics side by side, then if there are 2 near the end that don't match, that do match, then I can go ahead and go to a pair, like, oh, those 2 are the same. Then I can go back and undo another pair so that I don't end up with 2 that are the same. Looks like I'm doing pretty good so far though. Let's see, those 2 can't go together. These 2 can. And these 2 can. There we go. So now I know that I've done a good job. And all of these don't match up. Now I'm just about out of bobbin, so before I forget, I'm gonna swap out that bobbin and then I'm gonna go ahead and sew these dark pairs, and then we'll come back to the next step of putting these rows together. All right, I have all my light pairs and my dark pairs. We're gonna start with my light pairs, and I needed to turn this into 4 rows, each row having 6. So I need to sew 3 pairs together. And again, if I can avoid having the same, meaning next to each other, then that's great. If I end up having the same next to each other, not a big deal. But because I need 4 rows, I'm going to sew 4 sets of pairs together, and then I should have 4 left over, and then I'll add those on the end, and I'll end up with 4 rows, each having 6 pieces. So whatever makes sense for you to do this. Again, if you wanted, you could have put these on the floor and laid them out how you wanted. That's fine. You could just sew them into each row individually and just grab and make each row. I like doing them in big chunks like this, so I've done them into pairs, and I need rows of 6. So 3 pairs makes a row of 6. So I just need to sew 3 pairs together. I need a total of 4 rows of my light down arrows and 4 rows of my dark down arrows. So I'm going to sew these up, and then we'll have our rows together, and then we just need to sew our rows together to make the quilt top before we can take this over to long arm and get it quilted. That's 4 rows of light colored down arrows, and now I need 3 rows of dark colored down arrows. I'm going to do this the same way. Grab a dark set, another dark set, put them right sides together. Do that 3 times for 3 rows. Add on the 3rd one to finish up my 6 squares or 3 pairs on each row. And then we're gonna come back to press these rows, and I might throw them up on the design wall so we can start getting a look at what this is gonna look like all together. Now if you have a pair that won't fit on one side, you can bring it over to the other side and see if it fits better on the other side. I think I'll do this one. All right, I have my light down arrow rows here and my dark down arrow rows here, and you can start to see how this chevron is going to come together. It's looking good, but I need to press them, and I want to alternate the directions that I'm pressing the rows. So I need to press all the darks maybe towards the left of the arrow and all the lights towards the right of the arrow, and that will mean that these seams will be in opposite directions when I go to sew them together, and they'll nest nicely, which will have less bulk in these seams. So let's get the iron out and we'll iron all these rows. And these points should all be a 1/4 inch away from the edge, because that seam allowance means that it'll hit just perfect right there. And if your points aren't exactly perfect, that's probably fine. It's up to you how perfect you want everything to be and what your personal preference for perfection is. For me, this is fine. All right, I have my 4 rows of my light down arrows and my 3 rows of my dark down arrows, and they're all done. We can start to see how this is going to come together. Yay! Now, at this point, I really would like to lay them out on the floor. I'm not going to show you my floor right now, though, so we'll just go ahead and pin them up to the design wall-ish. They're not fully going to fit on here, so we're just going to do the best we can. And I'm going to overlap these a bit on purpose, because my design wall is not going to be tall enough, especially since I don't want to go all the way to the floor. I'd love for you to be able to see most of this. And I'm just trying to see if, like, this these two are the same fabric. Like, the darks are the ones that are matching on here, and none of them are the same. But for this one, which is my next light, I do have a matchy-matchy. So let's see if I can avoid it by grabbing a different one. So I'm looking at the lights. Yep, this one looks like none of them match. Alright, this is my last dark row, and these two do match. So if I have these all laid out on the floor, I might try playing around with them and seeing, okay, if I switch these two, if I switch those two. But every time you make a switch, it has like a ripple effect. So sometimes you can make it work, sometimes you can't. This one's in the middle, so I could see about, all right, what if I rip this seam and then flip-flopped them? Would it work then? And the answer is no, because this blue would actually be the same as this blue here. So what if like I rip the seam at this pair and move the pair to the other side? Actually, no, that still wouldn't work. Hold on. Yeah, this blue would become this blue here. So this one really, I mean, I'd have to move the rows around. The other option would be to see if I could take my last light row and put it here instead. And that would mean that these two lights would match up. So let's see how this light, well, with this last one down here, this green print and this green print are matching up. So I have two that are the same that are touching. I'm fine with it. I'm not gonna go moving things around. I think it's fine. It's not the end of the world for me. But again, if you really wanted to make sure that nothing was touching, you'd lay out all of your blocks before sewing them into rows, and then sew them into rows based on laying them out so that they're not touching. Like there's no two of the same fabrics touching. Alright, so it's a little bit hard to see what the finished quilt's going to look like because I wanted to fit it all on the wall so that you could see all the units or all the rows together. But we're going to go ahead and take our rows and start sewing them into pairs. So this is the first pair of rows, so down at the bottom. So these are rows 6 and 7. And I want to make sure not to flip them. And now I have these number pins that I can use. Oh, these are arrow pins on that side. This side has these number pins to make sure that I remember which set of rows they are. So these are rows, this is rows 6 and 7. I'm just going to put a pin on 6. I don't need to go find the 7 pin. Well, I guess I could. This is the 7 pin here. And this is what I do when I'm moving the rows back and forth on the floor, that I can see which goes where. And now I can go ahead and put pins on the wall ones as well. There are all kinds of things you can use. These are number pins. There are also number clips. There are alphabet and clips, whatever you can use in order to make it easier for you to know which row is which and not to mix them up. Great. Now, all of these blocks should nest, so I don't need to pin if I don't want to, and I don't want to. So I'm going to sew these together. So I should just be able to line up the rows. Nest these seams down here. Beautiful, beautiful. And so. Now gravity is pulling on these, so if I was sitting, I would put them on my lap. I'm not sitting, I'm standing, so I'm going to set them here on the side so that gravity doesn't pull on these rows too much, because that would mean that my sewing machine has to fight to bring these up. And it doesn't matter how good your sewing machine is, it shouldn't have to fight gravity. If you didn't see what machine I'm using my Baby Lock Jubilant. It's the machine that I have in most of my videos here. I usually sew on this one because it is a super accessible machine. It's not a big scary looking machine, although I have a big Baby Lock Ballad and that's my go-to machine when I'm gonna sit down and sew. But I feel like a lot of new quilters get intimidated by seeing a big machine like that on the table. And there is nothing intimidating about it, but I feel like quilters do get intimidated when they see a machine like that. So there is nothing to fear. It does all the things that this machine does and more if I want it to, but it has bigger throat space. There's more space to quilt, and I have a nice extension table on it, so it's really lovely to sew on. But the Baby Lock Jubilant is fabulous. I've sewn many quilts together here on the Baby Lock Jubilant. And it has, to me, everything you need as a beginning quilter. It has a needle threader, it has a thread cutter, it has some stitch options. You can do zippers on it, you can stitch beautiful 1/4 inch seams on it. It has that visible bobbin so that you can see when you're going to run low. So the Jubilant really has everything that I feel like a quilter needs, and so I do a lot of projects on it. Most of the projects here on the YouTube channel are done on the Jubilant. Alright, so that is one pair of rows together. I'm going to sew these together into pairs. I will have 3 pairs, and at the end I will have 1 row left over. Then I'm going to be able to sew the pieces together, so I have 3 in one set and 4 in the other. And then I'll be able to sew those 3 and 4 together, and that'll be the only time that I have the whole quilt on this machine that I'm sewing all of it together. So I'm adding each time, kind of doubling the number of rows. So instead of adding 1 row and then a 2nd row and then a 3rd row and then a 4th row, which is a lot of work for you to push through the machine as well, I like doing my rows in pairs. Yay! We have our 1, 2, 3 and our 4, 5, 6, 7. So now we get to do this big, it's really the same size, I guess. It's the final seam, but it feels big, but it's the same size as the seams we've already been doing. And I'm, again, folding it up on the table. I can press it between my body here and the table because it is a lot of weight. It's now the whole quilt that I'm running through the sewing machine, even though it's just that same single seam that I've been doing. And then we'll have our quilt top done. So that's exciting. But the same process, I'm just going to match up these seams, nest them, and sew these 2 halves together. There we go! Alright, that was the last seam. That's 7. This is 1. Here you go, you get to see it finished before I do. I'm looking at from the back, making sure that I didn't mess up any of those chevrons. They look good. They look good! Okay, so this quilt needs to be given a good press. I'm going to press all the seams, the horizontal seams in one direction, either up or down, it doesn't matter. And then we're going to take this over to the long arm, and we're going to put it on the long arm and add some quilting to this quilt before we bind it, making sure we add a label when we bind it, and we're going to have a finished quilt. Alright, I have the quilt loaded onto the long arm. I've set my frame space and area. My next step is to pick a quilting design. And I am not a professional when it comes to long arming. I consider myself a decently trained monkey in being able to do this. I know what buttons to press most of the time, and if things go sideways, then I just turn it all off and turn it all back on again, and then it works beautifully. And I know that when it's not working, it's a me issue, so turning it off and turning it back on again gets me back to a clean slate so that I can get started on it. So I'm definitely not an expert long armer, but I know enough to be able to get these quilts done on the long arm. So let's pick a design. I do want to get this done fairly quickly, so I'm going to be looking for like a bigger design that's going to stitch out fairly fast, and something that's not too dense. And this has a lot of like florals and cutesy in it, so I'm going to be looking for a design I think that is floral or cutesy. I think that's going to look best. So let's look at some of the options. This rose is pretty nice, but I feel like it's still going to be too dense. I'm looking for something that's a little more space between. I mean, this flower border could work. Ooh, I like this one. I know it's a border design, but I'll be able to stack it and it should look good. And it's really big. Look at that. All right, so I went ahead and stacked the rows so that they alternate. And then I'm going to take this design, bring it up. Now I added a couple extra rows here so that if the rows weren't far enough apart, I could squish them up and I'd still have extra rows down here, but this looks fine. So I'm going to go ahead and crop it to the size of my quilt. And this should be ready to stitch out. Here's a look at what that looks like. So I'm going to bring this over to my start point. So I've already basted down the quilt. It's all ready to go. And I have my scrap fabric here from when I tested all my tension. So it should be all good to go. I want a baseline and I want to save this design just in case something happens. Alright, so the quilt's all quilted, and I can pull it off the frame. And it's going to be time to get it squared up. So I'm going to take it to the big table in the back. To go square this up. So I have it here on the big table. This is the big cutting table in the back. And I don't have any big squaring up secrets except that I grab the biggest ruler that I have. This is a 20.5-inch ruler by Omnigrid. And this is what I use. And then if there's any lines on here that I can line up. So these are 9-inch finished blocks. So this 18 and this 18 should line up. And this diagonal line should line up to get me started. And try to get this as straight as possible. And then I am going to want an 8.5-inch strip of the backing if I can, which I should be able to get off the side here. 8.5 by the width of the quilt, and that's going to be my quilt sleeve. And most y'all are probably not going to be putting quilt sleeves on your quilts. It depends on what they're for. This quilt, the goal for this quilt is for it to be able to hang in quilt shops, that quilt shops can borrow my sample quilts and they can hang in quilt shops. So this one needs a sleeve in case the shop has a setup where a sleeve would work best. So I'm going to go ahead and add the sleeve on when I do the binding, because adding a sleeve is more work, but adding it when I add the binding makes it half the amount of work. So doing it now, just in case, will be half the amount of work.
Then later on, hearing from a shop, oh, and we need quilt sleeves on all the quilts, and then having to put the quilt sleeves on. So I started last year. Actually, it was when I was doing the quilts for this book, is when I started. Every quilt that I've made since the quilts that I made for this book have all had a sleeve, and I also put on the label at the same time as the binding. So binding now takes me so much longer, but you'll see when it's done, it is done because it has a sleeve and a label. All right, so I started by cutting a corner, and it wasn't really in frame when I did that, but that's okay, right? And now we'll just keep cutting. And lining up whatever I can to try to keep this as square as possible. We're all trimmed up, and this is the point in the video where if you haven't been drinking your water, drink your water, because we want to stay well hydrated. And we're going to look at binding, the sleeve, and the label. So let's look at those. All right, here's the quilt, all quilted up. This is for my label. Let's look at binding. So this is my collection of AGF 2.5 edition. These are the ones that haven't been cut into strips. And I have a bunch of just darn cute ones. But this one is actually the one that was made to go with the fabric. So since we actually have the binding fabric from the line, let's go ahead and use the binding fabric from the line. So we're going to use that. And then this is for our sleeve. To get that started, we need to have our iron on, because we're going to need that for the sleeve. And then we can go ahead and do the label. I'm going to live dangerously and do this on top of the quilt with a permanent marker. I know folks are going to ask what pen I'm using. So this is the Identa pen, and it has two sides, a really fine side and then a bigger side, and I tend to use that bigger side. And then I have pre-made labels. These are squares. I want to say these are 6 inches that are starched fabric that I've just folded on the diagonal. So all the raw edges are now on two sides. And because my backing is already blue, I don't think I want to put a blue on there. I think I'm going to do a pink label on there. And I have this piece of paper that I've already drawn lines on. It has a fold, so it's double layer. You can see I've used it a bunch of times to write on. And I put this right in my square, and now I can see the lines underneath. So I like putting the quilt name. All right, I ran out of room. I also like to put the date on here, and I know y'all are seeing this in October, but it's August 2025 as I'm filming this, so I'm going to put the date. I want to make sure that I leave at least a 1/4 inch seam allowance here on the edges. I like to do at least a 1/2 inch, really, because that 1/4 inch is going to be the binding, and sometimes binding gets a little big, especially on the back, so I'll leave at least a 1/2 inch. It's somewhat centered, and it has all the information. It has the name of the quilt. In this case, I also added the book. Oh, let me add quotes at the end of that. Designed, pieced, and quilted by Carolina Moore. The place, San Diego, California, and the date. At the very least, you really want to have the maker, the place, and the date. Those are the most important things to put on a label, but you can put whatever you want on your label, who it was for. I also tend to start a little lower on here, and I really could start a little higher up on my label, and that would give me more room to fit everything, all the information that I want on there. So there's my label. That's done. I can set that aside. Now I'm going to make my sleeve. So I've laid out this AGF 2.5 edition, and I got it cut at
a quilt shop and they don't cut it exactly on these dotted lines. So this strip here is going to go into my scrap pile because it isn't perfect. And then I need to cut a couple more. Now let's do some quick math on how many binding strips I'm going to need. This binding runs with the fabric, so there's 40 inches in a strip, and my finished quilt blocks on my quilt are 9 inches. I'm going to round that up to 10 inches, and that'll give me some room to groove, and it's an easier number to use. So the sides are 6 plus 6 plus 7 plus 7, because there's 2 7-block sides and 2 6-block sides, so that's 26 times 10 inches. So that'd be 260 inches of binding that I need. Each strip is 40 inches, so I'm going to divide it by 40. I need 6.5 strips, so I'm going to round that up to 7. So I need 7 strips of binding to make sure that I have enough to go all the way around the quilt. So I'm going to go ahead and trim these into their 2.5-inch strips. And when I have 7 of them, we're going to sew them together. Alright, my strips are all cut, and I want to sew them together. And to keep the same side on the same side, I need to sew them end to end like this. So printed selvage to non-printed selvage. I'm going to put them right sides together at an angle. Bring this to the sewing machine. And you can draw a line on here. I usually don't. I like going for quick and easy. There we go. And you can see that's pretty darn good. It almost looks exactly pattern matched. Wow. I love an accidental pattern match. After we sew them, I always cut parallel to the strip and then at give or take a 1/4 inch, and then parallel to the other strip because that cuts off those dog ears at the same time. And then these will all get pressed open and pressed in half. So I'm going to sew these, press them, and then we'll be ready to put them on the quilt. The binding is all ready to put on the quilt, and now it's just a question of how do I want to put this on. I could put it on the front and bring it over to the back and have this really cute bold stripe like this, or I could bring it to the front and over to the back, and then I'd have this green, like these green circles on the front and then the flowers on the back. But I really want these flowers on the front. So in order to have the flowers on the front, I actually need to take the binding, sew it to the back, and then I can flip it over and have those flowers on the front, and I'll be doing the final stitching down on the front, which is a non-traditional way of putting on binding, but I'm totally okay with that. Now I need to attach my sleeve and my label before I put my binding on so that they're on there securely. I need to pick where I want the top of the quilt to be. I'm going to pick this edge as my top edge. And to make it a little easier, I have a really small table here that I'm working on for this, but that's okay. So I have the quilt, and I like making my sleeve out of the same fabric as the quilt top because it just blends in a little better. You don't necessarily know that it's there. Alright, I'm finding the middle of my sleeve, and I have the middle of my quilt top here. Since this is the top, I know that this is the bottom. So I just pick a bottom corner, and that's where I put my label. I just line up these edges with the edges of the quilt. And I don't want all these pins on here when I'm doing my binding, just because I'll stab myself with the pins. I'll just get poked. I don't want that to happen. So I'm going to go ahead and baste it. And the way we baste it is that we just give ourselves a longer stitch length, and we're going 1/8 of an inch from the edge. So this will all be completely hidden. These stitches will be hidden in the binding. No one will ever see them because the binding is going to go 1/4 of an inch. So there we go. This is stitched on. Later you can stitch down this edge if you want, or you can just leave it open as a pocket. Now we're going to do the same with the sleeve. Alright, I have rolled up my binding. I'm going to keep it over here on the side. I'm going to start on the back. I'm going to bring my stitch length back to a normal stitch length. I'm going to give myself a good 20 inches or so of binding to be able to match up my ends really easily. And then I'm going to sew this on. Now, when you sew on binding, the way it wraps around and how much of the binding gets used up in wrapping around depends a lot on the thickness of the batting that you've used. So you might want to do 1/4 inch, you might want to do a little more, you might want to do a little less. In my experience, it's actually my J foot that is perfect on here for this binding. So I'm going to swap out my presser foot from the 1/4 inch foot to my J foot, and I'm going to stitch a little bit of the binding and then check if that looks good. So I'm going to line this up with the edge. Got enough to be able to check that when I bring this around, yep, you don't want to, so I have a basting stitch here from the long arm. I don't want to mix up that basting stitch with this stitch, but I think that J foot looks really good. So I'm going to use the edge of the J foot, which is actually a little more than 1/4 inch, as my measurement for sewing this on. And if you have really fluffy batting, you might need a smaller seam allowance so that you have more of the binding to wrap around that fluffy batting. And if you have a really super thin batting, you might need a little bit larger of a seam allowance. Otherwise you'll end up with two sides of your binding that are super uneven compared to one another. Alright, when you get to a corner, you flip it away from the corner, then towards the corner. You've got your little shark fin that you need to pull out of the way. I'm going to stitch up to that. And here I want to lock my stitches real quick. I'm going to leave a little loop of thread here, but I am going to want to cut that loop of thread before I finish the binding, because that loop of thread can cause a little bit of like a point of tension in that corner and make it hard to get a nice corner. I have some scissors right here. I'm going to go ahead and cut that loop while I'm thinking of it. There we go. Alright, I'm going to keep going all the way around. Alright, I made it almost all the way around. I need to put this binding, these two ends together, and I have a seam right here. So I want to go ahead and do it where I already have this seam. That way I don't have an extra seam in here. So I'm cutting off this seam end. That means I ended up with a whole extra strip, one more than I needed, which I preferred that way. I always like having an extra strip, that way I know that I will definitely have enough. Now the trick to making sure that you cut your binding long enough is that you take the width of the strip we cut off here, fold these over one another, and that's where I'm going to cut. So the amount of overlap between these is the same as the width of the strip. And then this is my extra. Now I can take these two strips and I'm going to put them right sides together, making sure I don't put any flips in them. So just like this. And I'm going to sew here. And the trick is always you want to sew so that the sides that you're going to keep, which is the two long bits, are on the same side of the sewing line as the sides you're going to trim off. So you can pin this if you want to make sure that nothing gets twisted. But I think we'll be okay here. Now before cutting anything, I just want to check it, make sure that it looks good. It's okay, it might be a little bit on the loose side. It wouldn't be a terrible idea to re-sew it a little more snug. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. Looks like my line curved out a little bit as I was doing this. Check and see if that's better. Yeah, that's a bit better. Alright, leaving both those stitches in there isn't going to hurt anything. If I want to press it to the side, but if I want to press it open, I'll just pop out these other stitches here. Let's just take it, press it with your finger or your fingernail. And now we can finish stitching this on. Now to finish up the binding, normally what I do is I bring it around to the back, but in this case, since we sewed it on the back, we're bringing it around to the front of the quilt. And I like to bring it around to the other side, and I like to baste it in place to make sure that I like the placement of it. And I do that with glue. Glue to me is the easiest way to baste it in place. Now I know I'm going to get some heat in the comments for anyone who's watched the video this far of, oh my gosh, you can't put glue on your quilts. Yes, you can. It's like basically starch and water. It's water soluble. It's not gonna hurt your quilt. It's not gonna leave a big lump. It's not gonna break a needle. I know it's not gonna break a needle because we're gonna press it so flat. I have done this and then opened it up and you can't even tell that the glue is there. We're doing the finest little line of glue and then it's getting pressed flat. There's barely any glue on there. A bottle like this should last someone who's making as many quilts as I am lately a couple years, honestly. It uses maybe 2 tablespoons of glue total on the whole quilt, if that. I would be surprised if it was that much. So we are doing the barest amount of glue. So you can, on one side of the quilt, start by pressing this, and I definitely like to do this when the binding starts on the front of the quilt and goes around the back, because then you get a nice crisp line there, but you don't have to. And then, yep, that placement is going to look really good. You don't even want to open the glue all the way, just enough to be able to get some glue out. There we go. And we're just doing a tiny little line, and that line is going to be inside the stitching line. So you're seeing some of the basting stitches from when I put this on the long arm. Don't worry about those. We want it inside the line that is the stitching line of putting the binding on. I'm going to wrap this around to the front and then press it with the iron. And it's really the teeniest, tiniest amount of glue. So you can see that's on there. I've got all those little flowers, they look so cute. And I'm going to be able to stitch this on the front and try to hit that ditch in the back. So it should look really nice. Now for a corner, I'm going to pop out that corner. And I have my fold on this side. Let me clean that up a little bit so it's neater. There we go. So I have my fold on this side. I don't want the fold to be on this side because then I have the both folds facing the same direction. So I want the fold to go this way. And if this doesn't make any sense to you, don't worry about it. It's not that big a deal. But I like having the folds go in opposite directions. So that means I need to do this side first. And I add a little extra dab of glue here in this fold so that sits right. And you can look, if any of this looks off or crooked, you don't like it, you can just peel it off. It's much easier than having to unpick stitches. I've got some stray threads in here, so I'm going to clip those off already. Super easy. All right, we're going to keep doing this all the way around to baste our binding down. And then we'll be able to finish stitching it down. All our binding is stitched to the back and glued to the front. You can see the label is in place. It looks really good. And now we just need to stitch down the front of the binding. I'm going to eyeball it from the edge. I'm not worried about being perfect on this, so I'm just going to stitch this all the way around on the front. I'm actually going to bump up my stitch length by 1. I usually bump it up by 2, from a 2.5 to a 3.5. I'm going to go from a 2.5 to a 3. I think a longer stitch length looks nicer as a top stitching. However, the binding is a key part of a quilt, and so I don't want to bring it up too high because I don't want to lose the integrity of the stitching on the binding. So I'm going to put this underneath the needle here. Make sure I have my readers on. And once you've gone a little ways, you want to look on the back, and if I'm doing it right, then the stitches will hit not on the binding on the back, but just on the other side of the binding. And sometimes you can feel that from the front with your fingers as well, where that binding is. And you can sometimes hear it with your machine if you hit that binding. And that's something that just comes with practice. And if you do hit the binding on the back, it's not the end of the world. If this was a competition quilt, I would want to be hand stitching down the binding, and I would want to be hand stitching down that binding to the back. So I would have looked at a different binding or a different way to get this binding on. Take a look at how I'm doing. Oh, I'm plenty far away from the edge. I can actually get a little bit closer. I thought I was a lot closer to that edge of the binding.
Yay! The binding is all on. All that's left is to hand stitch down that one edge of the sleeve. But the sleeve is on here. It's secured on the top. The label is completely secured down on whichever bottom corner it's on. Here we go. Label's on there, and we left that good 1/2 inch edge so that everything is still visible on here. It's done except for that last hand stitch on the sleeve, which I'll do off camera, but let's go ahead and take a look at the finished quilt. Okay, we're back in the back room with the quilt. All done. It looks so good. This backing looks perfect. I've got the label on there. The binding looks perfect. I just think it turned out so good. The fabric is really fun. The prints give it like just that texture and dimension. The quilting is very sparse. There's not a lot of quilting on this at all. It is really, honestly, this is like the minimal amount of quilting that I would ever put on a quilt, but it quilted up so fast, which I really appreciate because I wanted to get this one done really quickly. Normally I do much denser quilting. I'd probably, if I use this design again, shrink the size of the flower, make it smaller and have more of them on there, just so that will make that quilting pattern a little more dense, because there's full like hands width where there is no quilting. But this should crinkle up beautifully when it's finally washed, after it has done its tour of quilt shops and it's ready to retire, and it gets washed and enjoyed and snuggled. So I think it turned out fabulous. This is the Zig Zags quilt from the 10-inch Quilt Block Book. Ask your local quilt shop about getting this book if they don't have it in already. And now you can turn those layer cakes of your favorite fabrics that you didn't know what to do with, that you now can't find background fabric to go with. You can turn that whole layer cake into the perfect lap or throw size quilt. And if you can find extra fabric to go with it, you can then add borders as well and have a bigger quilt if you want. Alright friends, that's it for today. Thanks so much for hanging out with me. Make sure that you give this video a thumbs up, subscribe to this channel, and I will see you right here real soon. Bye for now, my friends.